Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning or good afternoon. Hi. For those of you who just joined, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat room. So what do you do? Where do you come from? What are some of the challenges you're going through right now during this crazy pandemic?
Yeah, and what week? What week is it for you in terms of quarantine? I want to know. This is week 6 for me and my family. I have 2 young boys, 2 and 5. My husband and I are both working full time. My mom, who is retired, also lives with us. She's been tremendously helpful, but at the same time, she is very bored and she has nothing to do. So I've been trying to give her something to occupy her every day. There's been this company that has launched a product where you could, like, it's for older people, where you could speak to it. You don't have to type on a phone, you just speak to it and it records your life stories. So I've been trying to ask my mom a question every day, so maybe she can like record into this and then we can gather all this information to then really like have her full life story. So she's kind of liking that. But yeah, I want to know, what week is this for you? This is week 6.
This is week 5 for me.
Yeah.
We started March 26th.
Yeah, okay. I shared this with one of my friends the other day, and she was like, it's been like 2 months for me, if not longer. It really just depends where you are.
Right. All right. So we have people from, Santa Clara University, looking for product marketing positions. Around San Diego.
Oh my God, that's how I feel. I completely, yeah, that's true.
Loscon. Oh, MBA student at Kellogg in Chicago, graduating.
Yay! I'm a Booth alum, but it's all the same. I mean, I know we're still giving everybody a few minutes, but the other thing I'm curious about, if you guys are open to sharing, is like, how are you keeping yourself like occupied, right? Aside from just being busy with work and taking care of family, how are you releasing some like energy? Like, for instance, I'm a huge extrovert, and so I almost have to have some sort of gathering every other night on Zoom with family or friends afterwards.
Yeah.
Kids go to bed. Oh, no energy. And I'm just like, what do I do?
I play like code names with a few of my high school friends who are also in San Francisco Bay Area. Have you heard about that game?
No.
So it's basically like you have like 2 teams, and then you have like a spy master who needs to give clue to people and then have them to guess like 2 words or 3 words. So for example, you can only give 1 word as a hint. So for example, when you see dress and then flower, and this person needs to say wedding for 2. For these people to like guess with dress, and so it's like really, really fun game to like play together.
Super interesting. I see a lot of game ideas here.
Oh, I saw Anna. What's earlier? Anna is the director of global digital emerging products and platforms at Marriott, based in New York City. Week 6 of being at home and then furloughed due to the industry impacts. Yeah, so sorry to hear that. It's a very, very challenging time for like retail and specifically travel industry.
Yeah, super true. I know. My sister works at a hotel chain in Toronto, not in tech at all. She was in sales, and she's also been impacted. So it's definitely tough. Oh, Amsterdam. Hello. Ella, have you joined us before? We had another.
Hey.
Have you?
Hey, yes. I've been on the previous meetup. I
Yes.
really enjoyed it. So that's me again,
Great.
but under my name now.
That's awesome. I was just wearing a sweater that I bought from Amsterdam yesterday, and I was like thinking about it. It was from Scotch and Soda.
Oh, nice. I love that brand. Yes.
I love that brand.
Mm-hmm. Which brand it is?
Scotch
It's,
and
um,
Soda.
Oh yeah, I love that too.
I love that brand.
I think I learned about it from Run the Runway. And I'm like,
did
why
you?
why does brand always have the style I like? Then I look into that.
Yes,
still
it's an
using Rent the
Amsterdam-based
Runway.
brand, but somehow it's cheaper in the US.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh. Speaking of Rent the Runway, I'm still using it. I know a lot of people paused or stopped, but I still feel like that's the only joy, or one of the very few joys I
You can
get.
browse through the clothes.
So I'm still wearing the clothes at home. I don't care.
There's a Instagram account of a woman that didn't stop it, and she's posting photos of her working from home in these gowns, and it's
really?
a
What's it
good
called?
distraction. I'll find it and I'll post it in the chat.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
please. That is, yeah. See, I'm wearing one right now. Like it's like
Me too.
a dress, long sleeve dress, kind of like autumn color. I was like, I don't know. I just still like want to wear the clothes.
Yeah. Me too. I just bought this one actually from the Rent the Runway because
Oh, you
they're doing like a huge discount thing if I buy it, you know.
Earn Up. Sharon, I know Earn Up.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yes, cool. I love the mission.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a fun experience working there so far. A lot going on.
Great. I'm so happy to hear that.
My husband works at Mission Land. I don't know if you heard about it. I think they also give people, you know, like financial wellness help for people who live like paycheck to paycheck. Yeah.
What is bread, Alice? What's bread in New York? What does bread do?
Hi. So Bread is a point of sale e-commerce consumer lending platform. So we offer pay over time options. So similar to Affirm, Afterpay, Klarna, we are in the same space. So right now it's kind of fascinating because we're seeing an upward tick in people who are wanting to pay over time, especially for expensive products.
Interesting. Well, I like the name. I feel like all over my Instagram, Facebook, everybody's baking like crazy. There's like no bread flour. It's like sold out.
Yeah. Same with puzzles.
Yeah, same with puzzles. What is going on? I haven't done either one of these things. I just keep buying the bread. But that's an interesting startup. I have to look into it.
Yardley, you're very into fintech, right?
Yes, I love fintech. I invested in a company called Astra Finance. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's it's one of those platforms that allows you to do like automation. So like you can like set up rules as a consumer, and then it just goes into like however you get your money, it disperses into various different accounts, or how do you want to save towards certain goals. I like fintech a lot. I started in fintech at Dun Bradstreet in like 2007, and ever since then I feel like I could like never leave. And also real estate tech. It's like, how do we live, how do we buy homes, and then future of work, how do we work? Those are my themes. Okay, should we get started? We have like 64 people.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, let's get started. So first off, thank you so much everyone for taking 1 hour of your day to join us and, you know, hang out. This is actually our third episode, right? Time flies. Yeah. And it's actually amazing to see like one little idea to like kind of blossom into like, you know, many different sessions. And we actually have some future sessions coming up with other women in product board members.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see Yardley still holding up. And actually, she actually looks like glowing right now, like her skincare routine is amazing. So we can also talk about that a little bit later. Okay. But today we actually really wanted to really talk about, you know, the transition from an individual contributor to a people manager. So we talk about that, and we will also chat about how, you know, during this crazy pandemic, how do you be a great empathetic people manager, but also effective product leader, because your product roadmap probably also needs to, you know, pivoting at this moment. So Yardley, maybe let's get started. You can share with your experience of, you know, when was the first time transitioning from an individual contributor to the people manager? You know, how did you take that leap, and what are the things you did to prepare yourself for that? And I'd love to hear from the community as well. So if you'd love to share your story, and we will pick two. If you love to share your story, you can type in the chat room.
Yes.
All right.
Please use the chat room very freely. And
Yeah.
any other questions or sharing, because we want to make this pretty interactive. So I actually have two experiences to share. As a first-time manager, the first time I became a people manager was actually at Dun Bradstreet in 2007. And back then, I had just graduated from Chicago Booth as an MBA, and before that, I was an engineer. And at Dun Bradstreet, I joined the company as an individual product manager running the risk management solutions business. However, during the economic downturn in 2008, I formed together a business plan and pitched it to the CEO. And I mentioned this experience in our first virtual chat, but what I didn't explain then was that I actually had to build a team once I got the investment to do the business plan. And it was actually very intimidating because the people that I needed to hire were one, PhD degree scientists that can really do like predictive modeling with large amount of data and understand the security space of how to handle that data for our financial services customers. And second group I had to hire were really a tech team. And because I was looking at my budget, the most cost efficient way was for me to outsource a tech team very quickly. And so I was really hiring firms and like outside agencies to do the work initially, which I had no experience in. And then the third piece was to hire a financial services best practice expert, because I realized quickly that because I hadn't worked in a space, it was much more valuable if I had a best practices expert on my team that could really like travel with me and the sales team to speak with financial services customers. And the product was really around predictive solutions for banks. So I really needed to be able to speak the language. So my first step of assembling a team was really looking internally at Dun Bradstreet and see how I could hire, especially on the PhD scientist side and a financial services expert. And luckily I did get the internal folks that I wanted to join my team. And then the outsourcing and technology part was difficult, but I felt like that was actually easier because I had been an engineer before. And when you're outsourcing agency, you are very much like going through the process of setting expectations. It was very clear cut, and you're not really like people managing them per se, except like, you know, really on the deliverable and on the execution path. So I felt like with that experience, I got thrown into the process. I didn't really have a lot of time to prepare to answer the question. I actually hired people that were, like maybe 20 to 25 years above me in terms of like seniority and probably also age. So I felt that in that people management scenario, I was very much leading the team towards milestones, revenue goals, and giving them clear responsibilities. But I was not really doing like career development per se, right? Like a lot of these were like experts in their fields. I'm not going to teach them more in their function than what they already knew. So it was a very different type of people management experience than like what we would discuss in the second example, which is much more like in a tech company and you're like hiring PMs, etc. But I wanted to share that first example because I felt like that set up the foundation for me to understand what it's like to be able to manage people who may have tremendously more experience than I have and or work in functions that I've never worked in before. I found that I could still be a good manager and I could still be a huge value add, and not be afraid of managing people that might have knowledge that I don't know. I think that that was really important learning for me. And the second example then is like really at a startup, Trulia, when I first joined in 2010. I was an IC, really focusing on the real estate agent side of the house and all the monetization products. As we grew into a 500-person company, went public, grew to 1,300 people in 2.5 years. You can imagine going from an IC to building the team was like tremendously fast and through rapid growth times. I initially hired product managers, but also hired a project manager and also ultimately ran an integration project where I also had outsourced teams and consultants reporting into me. To prepare for that experience, I definitely consulted a lot of like more senior PM leaders, especially those that have gone through growth stage. I think it's very different being a people manager when there are a lot of changes versus maybe more like a stable large company where the expectations and responsibilities don't change. Because what I found a lot was that the people that were reporting to me wanted clear, one, like roles, responsibilities, ownerships for a long period of time. Second, understand like clear career pathing, like when would I get promoted to like X, you know? And it's difficult to have those clear guidelines when you're in a rapidly growing environment. And so I needed to seek out that type of leadership and people that have gone through this to really then understand and set up my team up for success. And I think the learnings that I've had there was, one, just being transparent is really important to the team about any changes that might happen in like roadmap, direction, strategy. You know, I think when you're withholding information, people get very frustrated. But if you're very transparent, being able to explain like, hey, I know we talked about you owning this area for Q2, but due to business reasons, you know, and we really want to focus more on driving XYZ, your responsibilities are now going to be changing. I'm really hoping that you can, you know, be flexible, feel like, you know, we're in it together and, you know, be very empowered in like owning the next set of very major responsibilities and outcomes. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I hope that you would be on this bus with me to really like go through these changes together in a positive way. I think the second learning is that career pathing in growth stage startups when you're rapidly growing is not as clear cut as like in large companies. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's important to measure against like KPIs and goals and milestones and have more frequent conversations, not just annually or biannually, but maybe even like every other month or quarterly, just to check in on where the career pathing is going and what other skill sets that you know, your team could be learning. Because like in startups, for instance, you have an opportunity to own like the entire go-to-market, you know, playing in things around like product marketing, working with partners even, or even like working with sales closely, or even doing like analytics. So there was just a lot more breadth that you could learn as a product manager. And so there was just like a lot of area for growth, and you can always set up your team that way. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So Lara shared a quick example here. Lara, would you like to unmute yourself and then share your experience with us? And this book you find really helpful.
Yeah, sure. Lingling and Yardley, thank you for inviting me into the conversation. Mm-hmm. So just a little bit of quick background. I moved about 2 years ago from an individual contributor role into leading a team of product managers and product designers. And so what I was sharing in the chat is that it definitely has been a learning process for me and something that has challenged me, you know, to grow and shift the way that I think about work and how I produce value for the company, and it's not easy. So a little bit of my chat was just around, you know, making sure that everybody hears that. And as you're making this transition, if it's hard right now, it is hard. And, you know, nobody has a magic wand answer, and that's okay if it's hard. I think something else that I found very frustrating early on is I was, you know, just trying to consume all of these articles and books and suggestions on, you know, how you could do it better and kind of what the tips and tricks were. And there's just so much content out there that can be very overwhelming. And like I said, there's not a one size fits all answer. So for me, the resource that was the most helpful were two things. One, a book called Radical Candor, which I highly recommend. And I'm blanking on the author. So somebody's gonna have to help me because that's terrible. But Yardley has it.
Kim Scott. Yes,
you.
I know her. She's awesome.
It was just so fantastic in two ways. One, I needed, you know, it was kind of an outlet, right? Sometimes you feel like you can't tell your peers that you're struggling, or you don't want to tell your boss that you're struggling. So it was nice to be able to read the book and feel validated that the feelings that I was having were normal and part of the process. But the second thing is that I actually found a lot of very practical advice in how to deliver feedback specifically to the team. And that can be a big challenge when you are managing people who have more experience or used to be your peers, or there's some sort of interpersonal dynamic. Finding the right way to communicate your feedback without being defensive or taking on like too much of an air of authority. I mean, there's so many ways that can go wrong. And it really helped give me a framework that was very, you know, human to go through that process with my team. So that's my soapbox. I hope it will be helpful to you. The one other thing was a Harvard Business Review article. I was just trying to find it so I can share it after, that talked about creating a growth culture versus a performance-oriented culture. And the short of it is that, and this somebody was commenting in the chat about like, how do you balance managing a P&L and kind of managing people? And I think what this article gets to, which I'm a strong believer in, is if you're trying to always find like the shortcut for performance or profit right now, you're probably damaging your long-term goals and output if you get too hyper-focused. Every situation is different. I haven't worked in startups where like the money might run out next week, but I think it's important to think about how are you investing in the growth of your team, and even if it costs more now, things that are going to drive more and better outcomes over the long haul.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing, Laura. So Ella has a question. How do you balance hiring for expertise and managing within project profits? I switched to COO role from PM role, owning our P&L, and it's a continuous balancing act for me. Any thoughts there? Or Ella, would you like to elaborate your question a little bit more?
Is it basically trying to balance the need of hiring someone that's maybe more expensive and having a lot more expertise versus trying to hire someone that might be less expensive with less experience? Is that the trade-off?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Ella.
Perfect. Hey, yeah, so basically the struggle, I guess, it's looking at it because we are working with many experienced backend developers. So our goal is to stay small as a team. So we are 10 people. So we are not looking into people who we need to train or coach.
Right.
So those people come a bit over the market price, right?
Yeah.
Which is understandable. And then at the same time, we are being a startup, we have a limited pipeline that we can commit to. So sort of managing the sort of revenue over costs is really a big challenge because we want to retain the people. And at the same time, there's a certain number of projects that we can do, big projects. And I think the additional challenge there is that we also build products for ourselves where that adds to our costs. So we have an investment fund, but we are trying not to get too much money, take too much money out of it and stay within the sort of cash flow space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on like your need and how quickly you also need to like get to market and scope, aside from understanding like the functional expertise that's needed. I mean, how I look at trade-offs, at least generically between like hiring someone that's expensive as senior versus like someone more, more within budget, as you said it, and junior is really around one, assessing like, do you even have someone internally to be able to take the risk of hiring someone more junior and inexperienced? So for instance, like if you look at the risk of hiring some people that are more junior, obviously it could be like there could be more mistakes, especially in development, and or like a greater learning curve that's needed, and or like just more like hand holding that's needed. And do you have someone in-house and to be able to take on those risks and try to mitigate them and or coach like these people versus like, if you're going to hire senior people, they're going to be able to come in and just like run with things. And so that's like one example of how I would look at things. Secondly, you could also look at, is it like a consulting or contracting versus like full-time? And like looking at the budget that way, because the other delta here then it's like time, right? So like if you're thinking about consulting contract, it's like X months versus like bringing in someone full-time with like years of experience in the company and having to pay for benefits, those kinds of things. I mean, the main concern in here topic, it sounds like it's about budget, so trying to get creative on how you would assess like the need versus like your, versus the risks, and then within budget or not. I think that's how I look at it in different dimensions. Anybody else can jump in as well.
Great. Alex, I see you have a question. Actually, that's very related to the question I'm going to ask Yardley next. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask here?
Yeah, sure. So as part of my career development, one thing that I'm thinking about a lot and trying to learn more about is just the player coach role. So currently I am an IC and I own a really large scope, but as I've grown in my career, part of that has been, how do I leverage other people to develop my skills and continue to grow my scope, but more effectively by leveraging people and direct reports. So one thing here is, because we're at a startup, a lot of our more senior roles are player coach roles where you continue to be an IC, but you also bring on new people to help them grow and also to enable them to take on additional scope and carve out parts of my scope to give to others. So my question here is like, how do you balance that role where you're not fully dedicated to managing people, but you're also not fully dedicated to being an IC? So now you have new responsibilities, but you're still expected to execute, as effectively as before. What are some trade-offs there? And how do you work in a way where you're making the right trade-offs, whatever those might be, and you're still as effective with this new role?
Yeah, I think this is a very natural like transition for a lot of people, especially working in startups. I mean, at any seniority really. Like even when I joined Thrive with Arianna Huffington's startup, and I was the first employee in tech, like when I hired like the first PM, I was still like player coach, and this was just like 2 years ago, until we grew out the team. I think with your first time doing it, I would really be mindful about how I'm spending my time and keeping myself very honest. I often encourage people to really log your time in thinking like, all right, when I start the week, how do I plan on dividing my time? What percentage of it is like IC work versus like people management work? And then at the end of the week, looking back, how did you then spend your time, and try to do that and see some sort of pattern. And then at the same time, in parallel, making sure you're getting feedback from your manager and also your directs on how you're doing against like your responsibilities, both as an IC and as a people manager, so you can calibrate. Then I think with those different data points and inputs, you're able to, one, have an understanding and be honest with yourself, like, what is the percentage of your time you're like spending as an IC versus a people manager? And then secondly, are you meeting expectations on all fronts, both like as an IC and delivering against, you know, your products and projects versus like people management and development and growth? I think that, you know, it's like a tactical way of understanding how you're spending your time and if you're meeting expectations or not. And then the third component while doing that is like engaging yourself on like your happiness level, fulfillment, you know, are you growing? What are some of the challenges you have while doing all of this? Because at the end of the day, you know, we only have finite amount of time and energy. And so you need to be keeping yourself honest in how you're splitting your time, how you're learning, how you're meeting expectations, and then trying to calibrate against like those different like verticals, and then having like honest conversations always with your team and those around you. Because I think the easy thing that I see a lot of people fall into traps of is just being overextended, because you're both like as an IC delivering, but then you're also managing a team. So there's just a lot of expectations on all sides, but at the end of the day, you're like one person. So you have to be like very transparent and honest about, you know, how you're doing against them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely does. Thanks. One follow-up question there, similar, sort of tangential, is like when you are starting in this player coach type of role, a lot of what I'm thinking through is carving out the right amount of responsibility for a new product person. I think us in product, we like to take ownership and we like to have interesting and challenging problems to solve. How do you decide like what the right amount of ownership is for a new person? And how do you sort of think about your scope and where it makes sense to carve out pieces for somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, I would be looking at like the seniority of the new person and like where that level might be. So I typically like to give people like autonomy and ownership. So I would tend to want to carve out an area for that person to really own. If it's someone a little bit more junior, then the area might be like a project or particular problem and then grow from there. But then if it's someone more senior, it might be like a entire like product line or like a vertical or a user segment and or something like that's upcoming, so that that person can actually start from discovery and from scratch instead of inheriting products that have already been executed. And then the second piece to this is like, how do you see your own growth and projection from there? Like, do you see yourself being like clearly a people manager and not being an IC anymore in 6 months? And if so, and then if that's a scenario, how do you backward play from there to hire the right people to then be able to fill your shoes? And then having the right team to be in that. But if that's not the case and you see yourself being an IC player coach for a long time, then I would look at like, do I want to own the most important critical project? Because that's what the business like needs me to do, versus like owning something that's not as important. So then I can spend more energy developing the team and being a people manager to them. And then I'm not a blocker for like major initiatives that need me as an IC to launch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So Yardley, we know it's a very challenging, very tough time right now for companies, for employees, for basically for everyone. So, you know, as a product leader and people manager, you know, one has to really lead the team to pivot product direction while also really being very empathetic for the team members. So what advice do you have in terms of, you know, balancing the two things?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I want to add a little bit more to it. I think there are a lot of companies that are actually going through layoffs right now and downsizing, and that's very real. It's actually something during recent times that's like on my mind a lot. That's why I started that Google form where like, if anyone's impacted looking for jobs, please fill it out. I'm happy to I'm circulating with companies I work with and also VCs I'm working with. it actually really pains my heart. And it's one of those things that's keeping me up at night, to see people being really impacted right now with layoffs, or like, potentially like, starting new families, and or like in harsh like situations where like financial stability really matters. And I think being a manager through this time, especially when there are higher level, things that are happening, whether it's layoffs or change in business strategy, tons of companies are also pivoting at this moment. I think being a people leader at this time, a couple of things is really important. One, having all the right information for yourself to understand what is going on in big picture. It's really important, because then that allows you to have the right messaging with your team, and being as empathetic as possible. Of course, you cannot be transparent with everything that you learn, but understanding the entire picture and why decisions are being made a certain way, I think will really help you become more like having a more understanding on all sides, and then being able to craft messaging and communication that's better for your team. I think secondly, being able to take some time for yourself. I think it's important, because like, I think a lot of people right now, what I'm seeing is trying to like do it all. Some are just even trying to be like, it's fine. And it's just like kind of like robotic like, and or like kind of having this tough surface of like, it's fine, I've been through layoffs before, I can do this, no big deal. No, it is kind of like a big deal. And I think it's fine to recognize that, and like giving yourself some time to digest the information, feel how you feel before you have to like really talk to your team. Because you, in front of your team, you're going to want to be strong, you want to be calm, you want to be concise with your messaging, be empathetic. And I think having the time for yourself is important as a leader, and like people often underestimate that. And then I would say the third thing is really checking in with your team members on what they need right now, as much as they can open up to you. Is it like more flexible working hours, and being transparent that, or even like economically, they're not set up right to work properly from home. And whatever it is, like just checking in to see what kind of support you could provide and showing that you care. I think it's important, while communicating like roadmaps might be changing, business might be changing. It's just important to have that human element, because like we are going through unprecedented times right now. And so just, you're not seeing people like, for those that are used to working in offices, you're not just like grabbing a coffee and like seeing people's faces. A lot of times these Zoom calls becomes just like audio calls. Like you're not even seeing the person's expression, like people are like taking walks or whatever, so you're not really knowing. So I think during this time, checking in more about like, hey, before we jump into that project, how are you feeling, like what's going on with you, and just taking a few minutes to really understand how the individuals are handling the situation, I think is good. And then you're able to form better connections and be a better leader during this time.
How do you think one leader can actually manage expectations right now, knowing people are probably really struggling at, home, and they're not going to, reply your Slack message immediately or email immediately?
As a people manager, or
right, as a people manager, or maybe even as an individual contributor, how do you clearly communicate to your manager about, I'm going to get my work done, but I'm not going to get to it like immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to be transparent. I mean, so right now I'm not working full-time in one company, but as I mentioned, I'm like an advisor, board member, and consultant to various different companies, and setting expectations with people that don't work with me on day-to-day and might know me for a shorter period of time is also very important. And for instance, there's one company I'm spending 2 days a week with, Monday and Tuesdays. And I do think that the culture is people work a lot of hours, and like it is like a very really talented team. I love what they're doing. But the honest reality and truth is that I have like 2 young boys right now, like 2 and 5-year-old, that I have to take care of. And, I need to be here for my family. So I didn't, say like, hey, here are my hours, like during like, the initial conversations, but I have made it clear through various different conversations, one-on-ones, and even on my calendar when there are times where it's like family time. I mean, it's like my 2-year-old needs to take a nap and he really only wants me, or else he'll like extend the crying time for another hour. So I just block off like 40 minutes for that, in the middle of the day. And it just makes the whole family function much easier. Otherwise, I'm losing even more time because then he'll just end up crying and it just becomes even longer ordeal. So I have been making it pretty clear, like, and I will proactively communicate. For instance, I had a deliverable yesterday and I said like, hey, great chat today, to recap, I'm going to be doing XYZ, but I will be doing that like tonight or latest by tomorrow, 9 a.m. You will be getting it. So like, I'm trying to be a lot more proactive about like timelines and when you can expect to hear from me. And another example is like someone sent me something yesterday and wanted me to look at it. And I'm usually very responsive, but I emailed her back and I said like, hey, happy to take a look. When do you need this by? And just trying to understand like, when does she need it? And she turned out like she doesn't need it until Friday. I'm like, great, awesome. I'll get back to you by Friday. Like, instead of trying to be like, I'm just going to respond to this, like everything that's coming in, like just be smarter about like how you're planning your time, and also like asking more questions when things are needed from you. And then setting the proactive communication, I think, is important, because then once you operate like this, people are seeing you deliver, you get back to them at the right time. And so I think like that just makes it a lot easier for them to also do the same thing with you. And then it becomes a lot more like natural working environment.
We have a question here in the chat room. Can you say more about ways to add value when managing people with very different or extensive experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day is really understanding what he or she wants in, the career. So I guess going back to the Dun Bradstreet experience, because I think that was like first time being people manager and everyone was so much more senior than me. I found that, certain individuals wanted to move into a different function, because I remember him actually very well. He's still like, so I just had such fond memories of working with him. But like, I remember this one, the financial services best practice expert. I mean, he had been in the field, I think, for 30 years by the time we worked together. And he just really wanted to move into a different function. And no one had ever considered helping him do that in his career because he's always done the same thing. And I was able to really make that as a part of our like relationship, and like my promise to him as a manager that I would really try, and try to give him like, exposure to the right people, projects, like just like how you would typically manage someone. But like, I was surprised that even with someone who's had such deep expertise, it was just like kind of the same skill set as a people manager that you would like do for others. And then I would say the second thing is like really recognizing, like from a career growth perspective, like, are there opportunities for that particular function or that group to grow even further? Because a lot of times, like for instance, the PhD, like statisticians and like data scientists, I mean, like I feel like sometimes they were saying things that I didn't even really understand at the time. Like there was no way that I was going to grow them in like their field. But at the same time, like it sounded like when I started managing them that they, have been underinvested in. There were certain tools, there were certain like head counts, there were certain like data sets that they really wanted to get, they couldn't. And, like I was just, like you would as a people manager for even like PMs, like you just like, okay, well, if those are your pain points, I'm really happy to help there, and then really carve out a plan to help in that manner. And then the third thing is just like being goal oriented, metrics and like, oriented. I think people like to feel like they're doing a good job at their jobs and, being like successful if they're working really hard and working right. And so I think like just like you would about managing anybody else, is a similar thing, like being able to feel like you're one team striving for success and striving for your goals together, and you're in it together, I think, matters the most.
Awesome. I definitely feel like, everybody wants to be listened and then feel like they are heard of, right? I think that's really the most important thing a manager can give to their team members. Because I remember in my first job, I was in this global marketing team where most of the job is like really marketing related. But in a nearby group, they're doing like new product innovation, like incubation, where I find so fascinating. And I talked to my manager, and the number one thing, like, you always need to ask for what you want. That's something I learned. But also my manager really like took it very seriously, and then she find a stretch assignment for me where I was able to participate in another group where they are doing like new product innovation. We do like a lot of ethnography, field trips, and then, visit customer homes. So even though that really adds a lot of workload on my plate, but I feel so grateful for my manager that I even stayed with the company when I was relocated to California versus just finding a new job in California.
That's awesome.
Yeah. We have some new questions here. So, okay, Ella asked, as a board member, what level of engagement do you have with management team? What critical information do you look for?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a board member, we very much like, what is that slogan again? Ears in, noses out. And I have heard this like throughout the past few years about being on board, especially for operators, because we tend to want to just go right into it. But as a board member, you have to really listen and ask the right questions, and you can't really lean in too close and get like too much in the, in the way, and not be executional. So as a board member, a lot of times I do want to have the information that is like very much impacting the organization, especially the executive team and the team on like a bigger, more impactful like level, meaning things that are, potentially like changing the direction of the company, and or like exploring like new partnerships or new BD deals that might be like, really impactful to the company and changing its direction. In relations to product, it's definitely around like what have been the biggest accomplishments like this past quarter. How have we measured that, and then how do we look forward into the next quarter or like the next 2 quarters, especially as startups. Bigger companies a little bit different. I'll be on the board for bigger companies, much more like governance. A lot of the responsibility of being a board member for a large, especially public company, is actually around like CEO and succession planning. So it's very different than like you would at a startup. But I think the level of information that's needed is really being able to translate, especially from a product and tech perspective, into business terms. I think actually, I don't know if I've shared this, but one of my biggest passions currently is to really help product leaders to become C-level executives, like CPOs, and then ultimately being on boards. I mean, oftentimes you see like CFOs or CTOs being on boards, but not a lot of like chief product officers.
Right.
And I think that aside from board exposure, what's needed from product leaders is to really be able to get big picture and then explaining product investments and decisions and ideas in much more strategic and business sense. Like get rid of the acronyms, don't think about just like user research, like just boil it up to much more like, how is this going to take the company forward? How is this going to make an impact to the market, to our customers, to our users? Why would this be good for us in the long term? Like just think like a much higher level. And then being able to tell the story around that, I think it's really important, because you're not going to be added to a board by saying like, oh, I was able to like ship this product and it like bettered user experience like 10 times like than before or something like that. Like that's not like translatable into like what would be needed at a board level. And so being able to tell a story, understanding and translating it back into higher level metrics and strategic directions and outcomes for the company is really what's needed. And so to answer then question then on the other side, similarly, I look at it the same way. Like I'm looking at like the board, a lot of them at startups would be like investors, maybe some have been operators. And then, you know, when you're in public boards, I mean, that's completely different ball game. But like typically I try to think about like, okay, these people don't know anything about my products. They don't know project names, don't use project names. Like they don't know acronyms, like just making it layman's terms, you know, like anyone can read and understand what you wrote and presented as much as possible. And it's concise information. You can put a lot of details into appendix and also in your talking points, but just making it concise, appealing, like, you know, and then it tells a story and for people to understand what your thought process is. I think that's going to be like really important.
Laura, does that answer your question? Because I think you have a related question. Okay, you're nodding. Awesome. How can we as women and additionally as women of color get to the forefront of product and tech? Have you experienced adversity and how has that impacted you as leaders? Yeah, this is a question from the Yardley. Can you talk about that? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think I faced a lot of adversity. I mean, I feel like there's so many examples that like it's really hard to even pinpoint down to one. But I do remember like how I felt, you know, during that time, especially when I was earlier on in my career. I think one, not even like my ethnicity or the way I look, it's my voice. It does have this like valley girl, I think like high tone, or it kind of goes up at the end of my sentences. That has been brought up numerous times as work feedback for me for I don't know how many years. I remember I've even had like one of the big 5 consulting firms reject me based upon that because they felt like that allows me to not speak with authority paired with my stature or lack of stature or something. Then it makes it so that clients wouldn't believe me, for instance. And I actually went through with that particular feedback, like a voice coach. I actually took on it as a project to try to correct how I speak. And then at the end of the day, I decided like, oh, forget it. Like if this is going to be how it is and I have to change the way I talk, I just don't feel like I could be me, you know? And so I think that's like one example, not even like appearance or ethnicity wise, but add on the appearance and ethnicity. Like, I mean, even 2 weeks ago, I was in a board interview over Zoom. And the first thing that the gentleman said to me was, I'm sure we have a lot in common aside from our age difference. And so that's how the conversation was kicked off. And so it's just, you know, I think it does impact me even till today, because it actually did like make me pause for a minute, and then it kind of threw my game off a little bit, you know, just like right out of the bat of the conversation. But I try not to let it, you know, affect me and continue on the conversation, because at the end of the day, I assume like no bad intent, and that maybe he was just unaware. But I think the thing that impacts me the most in these kinds of situations is always how it impacts my confidence, right? And it makes me self-doubt, and it makes me think like, how do I overcorrect this to then maybe have more presence, or maybe look a little bit older, although I'm like 41, you know? But it's definitely, I think, something that can be received and I processed the information, but then I tried to understand where it could impact me, and I tried to overcome it by, you know, not assuming bad intent.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's up to me if I want to take that feedback and do anything about it, really.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's like particularly helpful, but that has been my experience throughout. I feel like the points when I've tried to overcorrect the feedback that's been given to me, and or stay angry, and or like just like, you know, want to like go throw some punches or something because I'm like so frustrated. Like I feel like that actually negatively impacts me internally. And I don't know, it's because like I've been focusing a lot about like self-care and gratitude and like positive mindsets. I just try not to like let those things like impact me as much as they did before, because at the end of the day, like, you know, it's how my attitude and how I react to it that matters.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Yardley, for sharing the story. Actually, I can really relate to that because again, just in my first job, you know, because I actually come from China. So at the time, I didn't even speak fluent English. So, and I remember there were my coworkers complaining to my manager saying, how did she, you know, hire a person who didn't even speak fluent English? But the fact that at the time I have like a very strong accent really didn't impact, you know, how I deliver my work. So I basically just like proved that they're wrong, like, you know, given my accomplishments and then like the work results. And again, my manager was very, very awesome in the fact that she actually always like protected me, and then she always gave me opportunity to speak in like meetings and then conferences to like help me speak up more and then really practice.
Yeah. I know I'm seeing some agreement here. Thank you. Like being petite, it's like so hard. I mean, like I mean, just to like riff on this a little bit more, like there was one company I work with, and I was remote. Most of this before the epidemic, and I was remote. And then I actually showed up and visited, and obviously there were a lot of comments about how short I am or petite or whatever. But then the CEO said, you know what though? Like, you guys could be saying that all you want, but she is like the only person that I've met in the last 5 years that would speak her mind no matter what situation. And I super appreciate that. Like, you know, he kind of like had my back, and I, you know, I was like, yeah, I speak my mind, you know, like, it's like, it's fine. But I think it's just like, sometimes it's like, okay, whatever, you know, but I do think that now I just feel like I don't let it impact me, because I think at the end of the day, I need to be judged by like much deeper than how I look.
Exactly.
Although it is still something that we are, you know, fighting against.
Yeah, I will do one last question, and we will maybe conclude this session. So Sharon's question: what are some strategies for gaining skills that are needed for people management in a startup where the opportunities to become people manager might be limited until the company grows?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, a couple of things come to mind. I think one is like seeking out like people that are people managers that you admire. I mentioned this before in a coffee chat. I think don't be afraid of like cold reaching out to people. I mean, I personally do read every single email and LinkedIn message that comes in. And you know, you never know where that can go. So I would definitely try to seek people that you admire from a people management perspective. I think secondly, books are, you know, a good good resource. I don't know how many of you guys read that book called Power. Have you read it? If not, I'll send this. I always send a follow-up email, so I'll send it as a resource. I thought that was like pretty good book about confidence, being a people manager. He takes it a little bit extreme, I find, but at least I felt like, okay, this really gives me some frameworks and like shifting my mindset a little bit about how to like be strong through like various different situations, like especially in the workplace. And I think third is like really thinking and asking yourself, like, how would you want your manager to treat you? Because a lot of it is about just like human relationships and like really caring about people. So if you're able to reflect upon how you want to be treated, I think that is a good step as well. I mean, personally, I felt like I was able to reflect upon a lot of bad managers I had, and I didn't want to act like that. So that's also another way of looking at it. But it's, you know, learning through experience a lot of times. And I just wouldn't try to over index on being hypercritical on yourself, going through it in the first time, because it's a learning process. And I think that we can all relate to like having junior people managers that have been our managers and or very seasoned ones that were terrible at it. So as long as you even have this like mindset to want to be a good people manager, I think it's like really great start. So try not to be hypercritical of yourself. I think it's important also.
Thank you so much, Yardley, for sharing. And thanks everyone for joining the virtual handout session today. We have many more coming up. Actually, in 2 weeks, we're going to have another one with Yardley, but next week we have one with Anna Grace. She is also a women in product board member, and she's VP of product at Macy's. So yeah.
Yeah, let me just speak about Anna for a few minutes.
Okay.
Like, she's a fellow board member. She was at Macy's and Walmart. She's one of my favorite people, ladies. She has the biggest heart. I feel like she is someone that is always positive and resilient. She's been in e-commerce for a long time, but she's also someone who's like been a people manager for really, really large teams, aside from like small teams, because of the big companies she's been in. And she's also a mother, and I just find her someone like to be very, very warm when I speak with her. So I can't say enough about Anna. I think she's great.
Yeah. So stay tuned for the next session. I believe Rachel will post links to register on Women in Product, the Facebook page, Facebook groups. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, and I would love feedback on how we can make this even better. I mean, we'll have a fourth one 2 weeks from now, and I'm happy to do these as long as you guys want and as long as like it's helpful. But I also want to make them better and good use of your time. So please give us feedback or give me feedback. You can find me on LinkedIn. Like I said, I always read the messages. So let me know. Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, everyone stay safe and healthy.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you.